Hi and welcome to the third episode of the Sport Report video blog. This week I'm going to answer a few more viewer questions. I've got 4 lined up to answer, so we'll cut straight to the chase. The first one I was sent this week was, Nick, why are so many clubs on the brink of bankruptcy? Will we see a day when football clubs are run like businesses without getting stick as Arsene Wenger gets for not spending big money on players? Very good, very pertinent question, given the situation surrounding the likes of Rangers and Portsmouth at the moment. When a big club like Rangers is talking about making players redundant, something's gone seriously wrong. I mean, footballers being made redundant almost sounds incredible in the very literal sense of the word. Just incredible, yeah. I think the answer to the first part of the question is quite simple, and I think the reason that so many clubs are on the brink of bankruptcy is fiscal mismanagement. I do think it's as simple as that. I feel a lot of clubs have been living beyond the means for a long time. You know, they've been paying players far too much, they've been spending too much on player transfers, and Portsmouth is a prime example of this. Sure, you know, under Harry Redknapp they did win the FA Cup, which was a great achievement for Portsmouth, but ultimately they've paid for it in the long term. You know, just looking here at some numbers, for a club of their size to spend 7 million on Sully Muntari, 12 million on Peter Crouch, and reputedly, because it's only paid for speculation, we're not sure, but reputedly paid John Utaka £70,000 a week, that's not sustainable for a club of Portsmouth's size. And I think the issue is why the clubs feel the need to do this. Obviously there's a problem, you know, with the financial gap between the likes of Manchester United, Manchester City, Chelsea, etc., and the rest of the Premier League. And these clubs obviously feel that in order to compete and stay in the Premiership, they need to spend a lot of money on transfers and on player wages. And so that's, I think, why this is happening. However, I think the likes of Paul Lambert at Norwich and Alan Pardew at Newcastle have shown that this is not necessarily the case. They haven't spent a great deal of money. Alan Pardew, I don't think, has even spent half of the money that they received for Andy Carroll. I mean, I know he signed Papis Demba Cisse, but that's about it. Demba Ba was a free transfer, and Newcastle are flying high. So I think people like Pardew and like Lambert have shown that it's not necessarily a case of spending a lot of money. QPR have spent more, and they're struggling. So yeah, I think it is fiscal mismanagement, but I lay the blame firmly at the door of financial directors and chief executives. They're paid to balance the club's books. Managers aren't. It's natural for a manager to want to sign the best players. You know, he's not paid to worry about the financial implications. That's up to the money men to say to the manager, sorry, not possible. And obviously at clubs like Portsmouth, you know, this probably hasn't happened as much as it should have done. As for the second part of the question, I do find it amazing that Arsenal get so much stick for not spending money. I know they've fallen off the pace a bit in the Premier League, but I'm with Arsene Wenger, who said that it also mystifies him. Arsenal operate as shrewdly as anybody in the Premiership from a financial point of view, and even they're only in the black because they sold Cesc Fabregas and Samir Nasri. So I'm not optimistic that we'll see clubs run like a proper business anytime soon. It's typical of society as a whole, if I'm honest. Everyone wants everything yesterday, regardless of the long-term consequences. This puts pressure on clubs, and when clubs do try to balance the books or rein in spending, like say Randy Lerner at Aston Villa, the fans start to rebel, and you start getting protests, and disgruntled fans just lead to more problems. And you know, yeah, so for that reason I see the reckless financial mismanagement of clubs continuing for some time to come. Even with UEFA's impending financial fair play rules, I think the actions of certain clubs in the transfer market shows that they are confident that they'll be able to work around those rules. The second question I've got this week is there any justification for the so-called British premium on players in the transfer market? Again, another very good question. It's a strange one, and it's something that's been a factor for some time now. I think I personally became aware of it back in about 1999, and the transfer that did it for me was when Kieran Dyer moved from Ipswich to Newcastle for £6 million, having relatively little experience. More recently we've seen Liverpool pay £35 million for Andy Carroll, and reputedly 20 million for Jordan Henderson. Manchester United have paid £16.5 million for Phil Jones, at the time a 19-year-old with only one season's Premiership experience, or one full season's Premiership experience. These are big fees for players who are relatively inexperienced in the grand scheme of things. To put these fees into perspective, I think you need to look at how much clubs have paid for young players from other countries and compare that to what they're paying for these British players. And it does seem that there is an English premium if you do this. If you look at what Liverpool paid for Carroll and Henderson, it seems unbelievable that Luis Suarez only cost 23 million. You know, that's only 3 million more than Jordan Henderson. And to put this in context, when Liverpool signed Luis Suarez, he'd led Uruguay to the semi-finals of the World Cup and impressed in doing so, and he'd scored 111 goals in 159 games for Ajax, a phenomenal scoring record. Yet he only cost 3 million more than what we're led to believe Jordan Henderson cost. You know, clearly a much more proven talent than Henderson. Phil Jones looks to be a good signing for United. You know, he's done well since he's gone there, but again, when you look at how much United paid for Javier Hernandez, you suddenly start thinking, whoa, that's a lot of money. United paid around £6.5 million for Hernandez, who has been sensational since he signed, you know, and we're looking at £10.5 million more for Phil Jones. So a big difference. You know, you can look at other examples from other clubs, such as the fact that Juan Mata, a very highly rated player when he signed for Chelsea, with a lot of clubs sniffing round him, moved for 23 million. That's a full 11-12 million less than Andy Carroll. So here, if you look at this evidence, it does seem that there is a big English premium. However, there are examples of players from other countries moving for big fees as well that don't seem particularly justified. And I'm thinking here of the 25 million Chelsea spent on David Luiz. I'm thinking of the money that Chelsea spent, again, nearly 20 million to sign Romelu Lukaku, an 18-year-old from Anderlecht. You know, it's all well and good scoring goals in Belgium. The Premier League's a different issue altogether. 18, very inexperienced. 19-20 million pounds is a lot of money, and we've barely seen Lukaku this season. So it's not an exclusively an English thing, this, but it does seem that there is a premium, but that it's maybe overplayed by the press a little bit. As for whether or not it's justified, I would personally say no. It just seems to be a market that's developed, and that there's now a going rate. Clubs are looking at Sunderland getting 20 million for Jordan Henderson and seeing that then as a benchmark, and you can't blame them for doing that. Maybe one of the considerations that clubs are making when they sign these players relates to the rules around homegrown players, that you have to have 8 homegrown players in a squad of 25. Those rules apply both in the Premier League and in UEFA competitions. So maybe that is, you know, a consideration, and is something that is affecting clubs' transfer policies, and has maybe created something of an artificial market. But if it's my opinion you're looking for, I don't think you can justify it. And I think that when Jordan Henderson's costing nearly as much as the likes of Alexis Sanchez and Juan Mata, something's not quite right. The next question is a rugby one, and it was sent to me by a friend of mine who is a big rugby fan, and he said to me, Owen Farrell is the bright spark for England Rugby at the moment, but will he be a mainstay and the next Jonny Wilkinson? I have to confess, my knowledge of rugby is not as great as my knowledge of some other sports, but from what I've seen, Farrell has done fantastically well both for England and Saracens. In the 3 games he's played for England, he's looked like the real deal. he's made some good breaks, he looks confident running with the ball, his place kicking's good, his goal kicking looks excellent, and he looks to be cool under pressure. I would, however, plead for caution. He's only 20, he hasn't yet played against the Southern Hemisphere teams. 3 caps for England is not a great body of work upon which to base an opinion, and there's been plenty of false dawns in the past. But from what we've seen so far, I think we can be relatively optimistic that we may have found a fly half who can lead the team for years to come. As for him being the next Jonny Wilkinson, no. We see this in football with the next Maradona debate. Everybody's sort of obsessed with the next somebody, and I don't think that anybody is the next anybody. You have to let players play their own game and develop their own identity. Farrell may be the next Wilkinson in that he monopolises the number 10 jersey for a prolonged period of time, but other than that, I think he'll simply be Owen Farrell. If at the end of his career he can look back and say that he's achieved half of what Jonny Wilkinson did in his career, then I think he'll be able to look back on a very successful, fulfilling career. And then the final question is the rugby one again, and somebody just said to me simply, what more can Scotland do? Again, I'll be honest, I've not seen a great deal of Scotland, but from what I have seen, they don't look too bad. They've got some good players in the likes of Richie Gray, Rory Jackson, Joe Ansborough, players like that, and they've performed well in their first 2 games of the Six Nations this year against England and France, but they just don't score enough tries, and it's the age-old problem with Scotland, particularly at home, bizarrely, at Murrayfield. Against England they were by far the better team, but once they reached the 22, it was poor decision making, intercepted passes, knock-ons, basic stuff, and until they iron that out, I don't think that they can really move on and look to be beating sort of tier 1 teams. So yeah, for me, I think they need to work on the fundamentals, and if they do that, then they're more than capable of beating the likes of England and France. Okay, well that was it for this week's edition of the Sport Report video blog. Again, if you wish to send me some questions for the next one, you can do so either on Twitter or by emailing us at npwsport@gmail.com. The information's on the right hand side of the YouTube page. I hope you enjoyed watching, and we'll see you again next